Hey, so, I wanted to do a quick video just recapping how to change your outer and inner tie rod on a 2013 Ford Edge. I'm gonna take some tips and tricks basically on what I found was good for being able to do it at home. So a couple things you'll need. We want a replacement inner and outer tie rod. Just pick those up off Amazon. And then to borrow some tools from AutoZone. So they have this import tie rod remover, and then this specific, inner tie rod remover tool as well. And then I also have just like a long pry bar that goes to a standard socket attachment. You're gonna need a pretty hefty adjustable crescent wrench or a big 24mm wrench. Had a hard time finding one of those. An 18mm socket and a heat source, and that's about it. So what the difference between this import tie rod remover is, that's gonna go here on this knuckle, but this long extension, that'll go kind of right where that boot is. And if you actually look at what we have on the new tie rod, it comes with a assortment of these kind of braces that'll go around these flat edges. For the Ford Edge, it's a 1 3/8 inch. And what that's gonna do is allow you to really get some good torque on a part that's pretty tough to torque. So that doesn't go on the new one quite yet. We'll need to put that on there once we get things going. But one of the more popular videos on YouTube has you removing that knuckle first. I actually found that I needed to put that back on to work on this jam nut, which was really tough. So I would recommend cleaning this up with some WD-40, scrub real good, get all those threads clean, and then, plan to apply some heat for probably a good 2 minutes, and then be ready to crank really hard to get that off. You'll have to look close at the threads to make sure you're tightening the nut towards the boot and not, back into this outer tie rod. And so just study those threads. This one, it looks like that's going to be turning it to my right. So I'm gonna go get that cleaned up and then get started. Okay, so I got that cleaned up and yarded on that with that adjustable crescent wrench, or again, the 24mm. Couldn't get it to budge. So on the other side, heating up with a blowtorch, or, I didn't have mine on hand, so I was using just a camping stove. Get that nice and hot, and just make sure you have any, so we'll get that nice and hot and then come back when that's heated up. All right, so that's pretty well heated up. I'm gonna turn it off and, obviously be careful, put on some gloves and start cranking on this. So we'll see how that goes. And that did the trick. So basically just gonna make sure that's staying loose and be careful touching that for the next bit of the video. And the main reason, we're gonna start working on removing this now, but once you get this loosened, this will start swinging more than you'd like. So I ended up putting that back in. So that's my tip, and then I'll get forward moving that. I'm just gonna take some pliers, and you can either cut it, or depending on what pin you got in there, just slip it out, and then I'll show you how to use that other tie rod removal tool. So I'll be back with that in a sec. Okay, so once you have that pin out, I'd recommend taking some penetrant and spraying around, cleaning some of this up. But then you're gonna take an 18mm socket or wrench and take off this top bolt. So I'll do that off camera. Okay, so that wasn't too bad. Came off 18mm socket, socketed off the top. So then you can either wrap on this knuckle with a hammer. I'm gonna use the tool from AutoZone and insert this under the knuckle. Actually, before we do that, we're gonna put this piece, put the threaded side on the top of that, tighten it down a little bit. I guess it doesn't thread, but you just set it on there, slide this underneath the knuckle. Okay, and then we're gonna start tightening from the top here. And I believe that might be a 19 mil. Yeah, that's a 19 mil from the AutoZone tool. So then you can start threading that tight. And it pops right out. So a little violent, but not too bad. This little bit of grease, I don't think was all in good shape, and was me putting this kind of into that boot, which pierced that. I kind of expect that this whole side was in good enough shape, but the other side was definitely leaking up inside this boot. And so while I'm at it, figured I'd make a video how to do the other side as well. Okay, so once you have the jam nut loosened, we can kind of hold the inner tie rod in place. Got a 17 mil, I don't think that's the right size, but it still grips it. And then you can kind of start rotating your outer tie rod off of here. So, and you have to count the revolutions. So that's an important part. So that's 1 revolution, and then it should get easier from here. Okay, so this took 19 turns to get off on the left side. My passenger side took 20 turns. Just make mental note, because when we put on the new one, that's what we want, those exact turns back. So we're gonna set that old one down and just thread this old jam nut off. Once we get that off, we're gonna start working on this boot. There's a clamp that we can get off with pliers right there. And then there's, from the manufacturer, a wire cable and back. It's kind of tough to get off. You can probably just cut the twists off and then still have enough wire to rethread it back on when you need to. Or you can use a zip tie or something like that. All right, so I took some wire cutters. It didn't go super easy, but stick them way back there, and just making sure you don't cut the boot. You can clip that tie. And then that'll come right off. Depending on the shape of your inner tie rods, there might be oil in there. You might grab something to catch that. At this point, you'll want to turn your wheel, since I'm working on the left side, you turn your wheel all the way to the right, and that'll extend this out your way. Now we're gonna finish removing that wire, pull off the boot, and then should be ready to get the inner tie rod removal tool out. Okay, the boot slid right off along with that wire tie. Now we've got a pretty well worn in tie rod at 175,000 miles. So it'll be good to be, getting those back to good working order. You can see this one kind of will flop around a decent bit. And so then you can compare that to a new one, which is nice and rigid. Okay, next we're gonna take that 1 3/8 inch collar and kind of tap it on your new tie rod. You'll see kind of the grooves that we're going onto. So we're sitting the collar around 2 sides of those. Either orientation doesn't matter, but it goes on pretty stiff. That's good because it's going to take some good pressing to get it off. So I'll tap that into place, and then when it is, we'll show you how to use the tube style tool. Okay, so this is what the tool looks like. It does not come with this pry bar or the extension, so it'll take I don't know what size these are, but kind of the standard socket size to the 1 diameter bigger. That does not come with it either, so make sure you got one of those on hand. Okay, now we're going to slide this collar so it's on one of the openings here, and then slide it right over. And then re-engage that collar. Now we're going to start working on turning counterclockwise. This one isn't easy, but it's not too bad if you have the tool here. Okay, and I guess I had broken it, so now you can just, or good kind of broke, loosened it, and now I can just spin it off. Okay, so when you're trying to get a pipe wrench or something on here, it makes sense to steer that wheel way out, but this was getting in the way, so I'm just going to put that collar on with the wheel turned back more towards center. And then with enough struggle, you get this off. That collar will pop right off. But yeah, that tie rod, it shouldn't be that loose. That's not a good sign, so good to get that replaced. You've already got some thread locker on the new ones. It's already pre-greased. I'm not going to put any additional on. So then we can just start threading that in until it's tight and snug. I will put that collar back on and just continue to tighten until it doesn't go anymore. So. All right, so this is that wire that we're gonna salvage from the original. Cleaned off the inside and the outside of the boot. Just gonna snap the rest of that off. And now we're gonna pre-size this because it's pretty tight under there. Okay, so I've got it like that. I'm gonna trim these ends, but with enough to work with once I get it on there. Slide it on. Okay, once you have that back wire or zip tie back on, put your C-clamp back on the front side, and then you can either reuse that old jam nut or use the new one that came with your inner tie rod. I'm gonna go ahead and use the new one and just thread it plenty past so you can get your 19 turns or 20 turns or whatever it ends up being, and then you can tighten that back on. Okay, now with that jam nut in, I'm gonna take my new outer tie rod, start with it kind of vertical, and make sure that your first turn that you're counting, it's actually biting in. So I'm gonna call that 0. Okay, and now start my 19 turns. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 9. So that's about where I want it to maintain the same suspension. I'm gonna pull this back jam nut in tight to hold it in place. Now, so we'll need to use a wrench to get that tight again. You may choose to put it back in that before you do, but don't forget to tighten that or else you might be in trouble. Okay, it may take some fiddling with the steering wheel to get that in the right spot. And remember, this outer tie rod piece can also move around, so you can shift that into the orientation it needs to be. But then you can wiggle it up through there, put on the nut, and I'll hold off on the locking piece until I get that jam nut tightened. So that's just finger tightened to hold it in place. I'm gonna really get that big wrench and pull that tight again, and then I'll cinch this down, put in the retaining pin, and then that should be a job done. Thanks for watching.